So Nate, you mentioned earlier unions and stuff. So I guess that one thing that unions have pushed for teachers is tenure. But what are your thoughts on tenure as it relates to teachers who may engage in misconduct themselves and or fail to report misconduct of other students? Like at what extent should tenure stop protecting teachers from being reassigned to other schools?
As soon as any wrongdoing has happened, right? I mean, I'm pro union for sure, but one thing that I've always seen that's been a pain for school districts, for institutions, is that when we've seen this with police killings, with police brutality, when there's someone who does wrongdoing, there's a lot of stonewalling. There's a lot of there's a lot of patience when if you see something that's happened, um, if you've just seen wrongdoing, then you take action on it right there and then. But that's obviously a discussion for union leaders, for administrators in school district, something for them to work on their not contract negotiations. I know that they still have they're still finalizing their contract with MCEA, for example.
Yeah, my understanding of, and I think if you talk to anyone from MCA, they tell you that their job is to protect teachers, for sure. But I don't think in cases of sexual misconduct that
Yeah.
the union would be standing behind the teacher. I think that the union would not be preventing the system from firing or getting rid of a teacher who's committed sexual misconduct.
Right.
Yeah.
I think like where some of the disconnect might exist is because it's very hard to, I guess, apply a tenure policy that doesn't apply to every individual, right? So like with substitutes, for example, one school can say like, no, you can't sub at my high school, but then that sub can continue to instruct at elementary or middle or other high schools across the county, hypothetically, which has happened in the past. So I don't know if you all have recommendations for how tenure and or unionization can happen in a way that's more productive and balances those two things. It's obviously a very loaded and difficult question to answer.
So, from the start and from my knowledge, based off of how I ended off this year, I mean, that's a conversation to bring up to your SMOB, right? That's the reason why we have a SMOB and what's actually so effective here versus everywhere else. Our SMOB actually sits in on contract negotiations, votes on our contract negotiations, and takes part in our contract negotiations. There's not much that community members can, or from my perspective, can push on. But if we're talking to members of the union or members of MCPS administration, also our SMOB, they'd be able to push on specifically what you're mentioning on these disparities of where teachers and staff are placed in school buildings. But from my knowledge, I believe that this is something that the district is always focused on. Same with principals as well. And so something to bring up to your SMOB to focus on throughout this year as Nick Asante enters in contract negotiations. Matt and Ananya, you guys could add to this.
I think part of the disconnect might be that there's with the whole proceedings of sexual harassment and misconduct, there's often a significant disconnect between the time that the incident occurs, it's recognized, and it's addressed, which is part of the reason why an incident occurs, and an individual, even if they are moved away from a particular school, is allowed to keep working, because the way, so I've spent some time in college engaged in some Title IX advocacy work as well. And the way these proceedings occur is pretty much that it's a very neutral process, which I have my own thoughts and opinions on, because it can become very difficult for a survivor and much easier for a perpetrator to continue engaging in such behavior. So because it's that neutral process is part of the reason why when an incident is reported, you can take certain actions like move an individual out of a certain space, but you can't take actions that would be significantly detrimental to that individual, because it hasn't been ordained that that incident has occurred as such yet. So again, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'm just sharing my perspective. Sitting on a policy committee at college institutions, specifically on actions that the university is able to take when such an incident is reported. So I think that speaks to some opportunities for broader federal advocacy and state advocacy on this issue, but it also can speak to some of the disconnect that you're referring to. So that's my understanding of the issue, and I can definitely say I can't speak to every individual instance, but this is a general trend that I've observed in my time advocating in this field. So.